Tonight I am planning on walking through some of the obstacles and resolutions that I came to in trying to get Windows with the Windows subsystem for Linux working with the NERVS project. The basic idea of this particular stream is to get from as close to starting point to building and burning a firmware onto an SD card as possible. Some of this has already been done, and it's really hard to back out and pretend like I'm starting from scratch. So I'm going to do my best to kind of walk through the things that I did earlier, even though I can't reinstall everything easily. So to get started here, basically the prerequisite in order to get anything working at all here is that you have to have the WSL installed. And the way to do that is to go to the App Store. So if you go to the Microsoft Trusted Store app, you can, as of the Fall Creators update, I'm not sure exactly the other updates. I'm pretty new to most things Windows 10 in general. But as of the Fall Creators update, I believe you can type in things like look for Ubuntu. And you can see this run Linux on Windows thing. And you'll come here, you get to pick which operating system you want to use. I'm using Ubuntu simply because I know it a little bit more and it seems like it's the front runner, so it'll be the easiest one to sort of mainstream support. As you can see, it's already installed here, but if it were not installed, you could come here and basically click the install button, and then you'd go through a relatively short process of getting Ubuntu installed, and then it's there. It's surprisingly fast for installing the whole deal. Once you've got it running, or once you've got it installed, you can run it from the start menu. I guess I got to use the one further down here with Cortana. But basically I can type in WSL and it'll show a run command, and I can do that. I'm trying to figure out how to make it come up to the top screen here, but I'm not sure if I can. Still getting used to Windows in general. Alright, anyway, once you have selected WSL, it will open a window that looks an awful lot like a terminal, just a regular terminal, but will have a bash prompt. It won't be a regular cmd.exe prompt. You'll need that. I have two windows open here. On the right side, I have a different window, and this is actually running cmd in administrator mode. So I need the command prompt, but it has to be running in administrator mode for FWUP and Chocolatey and the other things that we need to use to install packages and run them. So you need to make sure that you're running in administrator mode on the other one. To get going with things, what you need to do first is make sure that you have FW up or FWUP. It's the thing that uses it's the firmware tool that burns to the SD card. So you need Chocolatey. I can bring up the website for Chocolatey really quick. It's a fairly straightforward install. I'm also on a different laptop than I'm normally on, so everything's a little bit slower and awkward for me. And I'm right-clicking all over the place thinking that I'm left-clicking. There we go, finally. So Chocolatey is a package manager. Man, I can't even grab on the corners here. It's a package manager for Windows. So if you just go search for CHOCOLATEY, you'll come up with the first link is the package manager for Windows. If you tap on that, then you get basically it's a lot like Homebrew. It's a lot like Aptitude or Apt. It's pretty similar to most package managers. The way that you install it is pretty straightforward as well. So it wants you to basically open an administrative shell like what we already have open. And then once you have that, you just basically copy and paste this super dangerous script that you have to kind of trust or read through. And once you do that, it'll install the package manager. I'm going to try to do something really quick here and change my display settings so that I don't have two different windows, because some of the stuff is happening off screen that I want you to see. Alright. So now I have Cortana down here. You can see that I can type in like CMD, and then right click on command prompt, and I can run this as an administrator. That's how you get an administrator prompt. And also to launch Ubuntu on WSL, you can really just type in WSL, and it'll say run command, and you can just run that. You don't actually have to be administrator on that one. All right, so I've already run this command, and I have Chocolatey installed. Now that I have Chocolatey installed, I want to run Choco, install whatever package that I want. So to start with, I want to have FWUP. It should tell me that I've already got it. Yeah, it says it's already installed. You're going to need that in order to burn the SD. And I believe we have another Chocolatey package that we're going to want, but I'm not 100% sure on that one. Once you have that installed and you've got the WSL running, you're in pretty good shape. At that point, you can really just follow the Nerves installation guide. So I'm going to kind of walk through that just to prove that it's relatively straightforward. The one key difference here that you're going to notice is that you're going to run the Linux installation information. You're going to go through this part of the install guide. There's not like a Windows one that's useful for what we're going through. Since we're running inside Linux, inside Windows, this is the one that you want. You can do this. I'm not sure that this actually gets you anything. The first thing that you almost always want to do is run sudo apt-get update. That'll get you the latest versions of everything. You will, when you install WSL, give it a password for your user, and you'll want to keep that in mind so that you can type it in every time that it asks you. So we're just running apt-get update. This is pretty straightforward Linux stuff for Ubuntu, and should be pretty quick. All right, once that's done, then you can begin to install the other things. If I remember right, this first one didn't work. We didn't have the SSH pass, but we can try it. Let's see what happens. Oops, got that wrong. All right, it wants to install it. We'll say go ahead. Okay, that's installed. Now let's go on to the next part. Sudo apt-get install squash fs tools. Okay, that one's already installed for me. And then there's this relatively large one that has all the make tools. We're just going to copy it from over here. So pasting inside of terminal and inside of the bash prompt is pretty similar to normal. You just right click, and as long as it's on your clipboard already, it'll work, but I clicked the wrong thing here, so I have to do it again. There we go. Ah, yes, $signs. If you accidentally grab the $sign, you gotta remove that. Okay, those are all already installed. Good news. The next step is installing this thing called ASDF VM. ASDF is like it's another kind of package manager. It's a manager of development environments. So ASDF you can use to install Erlang, which you need in order to install Elixir and run with Elixir. So basically all the platforms are able to use this. I already have this checked out. One of the things that you'll notice is that maybe I need to bump the font here a little bit. One of the things you'll notice though is that it's got you checking it out to ~/.asdf. Windows doesn't really understand that if you end up doing this on the Windows side, but luckily because we're going to be in the bash prompt, it will still work there. So if we run that git clone, you'll see that it's going to show up and basically check out the ASDF source. You follow this basically verbatim. You echo this thing into your bash profile, and I will show you that really quick. It's in my bash RC file, but you can see that I have it set up so that those things are in there. If you have a little bit of trouble with this, you'll have to remember that you either need to source the file that you put it in. So in my case, it'll be source bash RC, or you'll have to close out WSL and restart it in order to get that environment update But once you're done, you should be able to just type in ASDF and get something back. That's a good indication that you've got it installed correctly. After that, you run these plugin ads. I will go ahead and run it, but I've already got these installed, so it's probably going to tell me I've already got it. Yeah. So you run those two, and then from there, once you've got Erlang and Elixir plugins added, you'll do ASDF install, for instance, Erlang, and then the version that you want to install. Okay, so I've already installed it. This particular part of the process takes quite a while to do, or I would show you firsthand how to run it. You just basically run this and then you sit back and wait for a little while. Erlang takes a while to compile. Elixir, on the other hand, is fast. So if you do ASDF install Elixir 1.5.0, I don't have that particular version installed, so I'll just go ahead and show you what it looks like when ASDF installs something. Okay, so Elixir 1.5.0 is installed. Next, you want to set the global versions of those things. The whole point of this is that it's a version manager. So you can install multiple versions of Erlang, multiple versions of Elixir, and use particular ones when you enter certain directories. Right now, we don't care about supporting multiple versions of Erlang and Elixir inside of our Ubuntu here, so we're going to set the global. So I want to do ASDF global, and then the thing that I'm setting the global for, which is Erlang, and then the version of Erlang. And if you're not sure what versions you have installed, you can do ASDF list and the name of the package that you're looking at. So I have 1.5.0 and 1.5.2 for Elixir. I'm going to set the global for Elixir to 1.5.2. All right, so a good way to know that you have everything installed correctly is if you do ERL -- version, it should spit out the version of OTP that you're running. So mine is 20, that looks good. To get out of it, you do Control-C, Control-C. And then I'll do the same thing with Elixir. I'll do Elixir -- version, and it will say 1.5.2. So I'm good. I have all the environment stuff set up that I want, and I'm good to move on. Now that I have the version of Elixir that I'm looking for in my path and all set up, I can run mix local.hex. And you notice it says run these things even if you have an Elixir installed already. It's a good idea. It'll say, do you want to do this? And then you just go ahead and say yes. So I did that for local.hex, and then I'll do local.rebar. All right. Run it again. Okay. So everything is good so far. Next, I'm going to install Nerves Bootstrap. So I want to run mix archive install hex Nerves Bootstrap. All right. You tell it yes again, and it's all set. There's some alternate instructions, like if you need to perform an offline installation. Now that you've got it installed, you can always just turn around now and just say mix local.nerves, just like you did for the other things. And it'll say, hey, I think I already found one of these things. Are you sure you want to install it? And you say yes, and now you've got the new version of Nerves Bootstrap. So we're all installed now with Nerves, and we have all the tools that we're looking for. If you have any problems along the way here, just shoot me a note on Twitter, or jump into the Slack channel for Elixir Nerves and ask the question, and we'll help you. Now that that's done, I'm going to go through just a simple getting started. And I'm going to jump right into the creating a new Nerves application. Okay, so in order to make a new Nerves app, this is going to be pretty straightforward, but if this is new to you, I'll go through it anyway. So mix nerves.new, you give it a name. I might already have this one taken. Let me have a quick look around. All right, get rid of the one that's already there. Mix nerves.new, and we'll do hello nerves. It asks you if you want to fetch and install the dependencies. you can tell it yes, it'll go and grab everything that you need to build the nerves firmware. All right, so there's a whole bunch of really good instructions here. Read through that if you need to when you do it yourself. I will go into the Hello Nerves application. One of the things that you need to do on a regular basis is set your mix target. So I'll set it to RPi 0 because I have one of those and I'm going to install it on it. And then you run mixsteps.git. And that mix target will tell it that it wants to target the RPi 0 system. So you need to do that either every time that you run a mix command when you're in this application, or you need to export it and make it sort of like a global thing. All right, so I have my dependencies. And next up, I'm going to do mix firmware. All right, so it's building the FW file that we can use FLUP to install onto an SD card. This particular part right here, this updating base firmware image with Erlang release, for some reason takes a while on WSL. I'm not really sure why. That's one of the things that I want to look into along with some of the other obstacles that I ran into. But it seems like this particular part just takes a little bit longer on Windows than it does on other systems. So we might just kind of sit here in silence for a second. While that's happening, I'll show my mug. So here's the thing that we're going to be installing it on, just a regular Raspberry Pi Zero. I have just an SD card adapter and a micro SD card that'll go into the Raspberry Pi Zero. I'm using a Microsoft Surface tablet. This is a lend to me, so I don't have it forever, but it does have an SD card slot on it, and that makes it nicer. So once this firmware is done, I'll be able to burn it onto the SD card, pop it out of there, install it onto the Raspberry Pi Zero, and then I'll highlight one of the other obstacles that comes up. It'll be a full working firmware, but the problem with it is at that point you can't just plug it right into a Windows machine and have it pop up like a network device like it does on a Mac or on Linux. So we'll have to work through that. I'm not sure I'll be able to solve that problem tonight. And now I've run out of words to say while it's building this base firmware image, so I'm going to turn my face back off. All right, good. Okay, so it built the firmware file. You can see that it, at the very last part of this, it says building, and then it has the firmware file. That's really useful and helpful information. We're going to grab that because here is the first major obstacle that you're going to run into if you try to do this. You cannot run FW up from inside WSL. You have to run it from the Windows host side, which is why we have this other window open over here. So what I'm going to do is copy the firmware file that was in the build target system, which was RPi 0, dev, nerves, images, and then the name of the application .fw. So that's the firmware file that we're going to burn, and we need to copy it to a place that's accessible on the Windows host. We're inside of Linux right now. We want to be outside of Linux on the Windows host. So to get there, you go to mnt, and then so mount C, and then you have access to your C drive. So from here, I'm going to find my user home directory, and then I'm just going to stick this on the desktop. All right, so if we open a folder and we look at our desktop, there is now a Hello Nerves firmware file on the desktop. Great. I'm going to take the SD card that I just showed you and put it into the computer, the laptop here. And then I'm going to turn around and run FW up. By the way, if you get any sort of like messages that pop up for inserting the SD card but it's not initialized or whatever, just ignore those for now. In fact, ignore those almost all the time. You want to run FW up. Well, first you want to make sure you're in the right folder. So you want to make sure you're in wherever you put that FW file. And then basically you're going to run FW up on that file. and it'll say, because you're in an administrator command prompt, it will find the SD card. If you do this outside of administrator, like if you just run it in a regular command prompt, it will probably not find the SD card in my experience. But in this case, it found it because I'm in administrator mode. It found it as a 16 gig memory card. It's got a weird address there, like // physical drive 1. I kind of trust that this is the right one, and from experience, it is. So I'm going to say yes, and FWUP just works like it does normally on any other system. So that's kind of the harsh workaround, is that you have to get the file to the host system so it can access both the file and find the SD card at the same time. Once you have that all working, then you can just pull the SD card out, which is what I just did. I'll turn the camera back on here for a second. All right, and then I will put the SD card in, and then plug in my micro USB cable to the OTG port, and then plug in the other side to my computer. I'm going to plug this into a Mac that I have here, and I'll tell you the reason for that in just a second. All right, so it's booting up. And I'm just kind of verifying off screen that everything worked the way that I expected it to. Okay, yes, I got an IEX prompt on my Mac. The reason that I did that there and that I didn't do it on the Windows machine is that the Windows machine doesn't detect the hardware properly for the network adapter. I'm going to try plugging it in and see what happens. Last time I plugged it in, it found that it was a CDC device, which is what the serial device and the network use as in gadget mode, but it didn't seem to find anything else, like it didn't know how to install drivers. I'm going to try it anyway. We'll just kind of see what happens. If it gives me a terminal device, that would be great. All right, I'm going to go turn the screen back off here. All right, CDC composite gadget is set up and ready to go. That's great. I don't know what to do with that. I'm going to ignore that. So the parts that I don't really have an answer for yet, I don't actually even know if there's like, I think hyperterminal is gone now, right? So I don't really have a terminal app. I can go to the store. I wonder how much it's going to cost me. Okay. Looks like it doesn't work on this one. All right, we're going off script. I'm going to try to find a terminal app for Windows and see what happens. Oh, putty, of course. All right, let's try that. I wonder if I couldn't install this with Chocolatey, but I'm not going to try it right now. All right. Okay. All kinds of good stuff here. Let's see if we can attach to this thing via putty. All right, we're going to try a serial device. I honestly don't know what COM port it's going to show up on, and I'm not sure how to find that on Windows. Is Device Manager still a thing? This is fun because I have absolutely no idea what I'm doing. Windows is great. All right. CDC composite gadget. Looks like it didn't actually install any drivers at all for this thing. I'm looking for COM ports here now, and I don't see any. Bummer. I bet if I double click on this, it's going to tell me there's nothing it can do for me. But we'll try it anyway. So at the end of the day, really what we're hoping to find is a solution that we can put onto this Raspberry Pi Zero that makes it work on Windows using Windows accessible device drivers, and also continues to work on Linux and on Macs, so that it just shows up like it does already as a network device and as a serial device. The cool thing about that is I can just kind of screen or putty or whatever into the running IEX prompt, the application as it's running on the Raspberry Pi Zero. I can't do that right now from Windows. And so it's a real pain because I don't have any access to get into the device to figure out what to do with it. So that's really the next obstacle. But the first obstacle, which was getting a firmware file burned onto an SD card, there's a workaround for it. It's not ideal, but getting it to the host file system and then running FWUP from there works. One thing that I did not show that I probably should is that when you run, okay, Windows is complaining at me. When you run mix firmware from inside WSL, it needs to believe that you have FWUP installed. And so you either have to have it installed or somehow otherwise essentially trick it. If you don't have it installed, I'm going to have to remember how to do this, but yeah, see how I have that FWUP file? If I think it's dpkg, what's the uninstall? I know -I. I don't know the other stuff. Remove. Okay, let's try it. dpkg remove FWUP. Okay. Sudo make me a sandwich. Okay. So I removed FWUP. So this is basically the state you'll be in the first time that you try to run mixed firmware. Let me go back in and try to show you what it shows you when you do that. Okay. Yeah, so it'll say, hey, look, you don't have the right package installed. You really need to have this before you go any further. And the way that you get FWUP is you go to GitHub. Well, here, let's go back to the Nerves installation information, because that's really the place that we want. So if you go to installation and go to top, it'll say the first thing that you really want to have is FWUP. And then right when you get inside of Linux, it'll say the same thing. So if you go to the installation page for FWUP, you will then see install instructions. This is what we did to get it on Chocolatey, but you also need to put it on your WSL. And so you can go and grab the Debian Ubuntu AMD 64 file. Now I noticed recently that when I click this, okay, good, it worked. Earlier when I clicked this, it was a 404 and didn't give me the file that I was looking for. So let me just grab the link address here. And you can, from within WSL, just type in wget and paste in the location of the FWUP file that you want. And then you can run sudo dpkg-i, the FWUP file. This time I have 19, so I'll install that. And now the next time that you try to go and run mixed firmware, it should work. So you can either, I've heard that you can either basically, you can either basically run the Chocolatey version of FWUP somehow, like you can link it from the host into WSL, or you can just basically install a different version of FWUP inside there. And that either one of those should work. This is the part that takes a while, so I'm going to go ahead and just let it build the firmware one more time. This isn't really a useful application. This is just like the hello world one. So all it does is drop you into an IEX prompt, which, because you can't get to it from Windows, is not particularly useful. But we have successfully burned a firmware image that we built on Windows and run it on a Raspberry Pi Zero. So that's pretty exciting, because I think that's a relatively big breakthrough. The next part is what I said earlier, basically making the network drivers work so that when you plug it into a Windows machine and boot it up, it looks like a network device that you can just SSH, well, not SSH into, but that you can push firmware updates to and use a tool like Putty and get into the IEX session and debug what's going on there. I am not really prepared to solve that problem right now. So I think this is basically it. I don't see any questions or anything in the chat room right now. So I think I'm going to call this one and post this video to YouTube, and hopefully some people can get some help from it. Thanks for joining me.